We are going to be talking about Disability Ministry 101. And this is for any size church, for anyone, on how to start welcoming families with disabilities into your church. And so with that again, I'm Doc Hunsley. I'm the executive director and founder of SOAR Special Needs. And SOAR stands for Special Opportunities, Abilities, and Relationships. And we're a nonprofit. We're based in Lenexa, Kansas. And for this, we are actually honored to be able to serve all families, all diagnoses, all severities. And with this, we help answer the three main questions that every family with an individual with disability has. First question, will my child ever be able to provide for themselves? Second question, who will take care of my child once I'm gone? And then the third question, who will take care of me as a parent or a caregiver? And those are three questions that have become taboo for parents, but we help answer those. And then for me, one of the big things that we do is we come alongside churches and help them in being able to answer how to welcome families into the church. And that is a really big thing, and that's what I'm passionate about. God has allowed me to come now alongside over 600 churches throughout the United States and 19 countries around the world to be able to help them learn how to welcome families with individuals with disabilities. So I want to go ahead and just talk a little bit about why we need to welcome families with disabilities and what we're talking about here with this. So first, what are we talking about? Well, here we are talking about having individuals with special needs, but why do I do what I do? Well, first, let me give you a little background about myself. My name is Stephen, but everyone calls me Doc because I'm actually a pediatrician. I was a pediatric ER doctor, and I got sick taking care of my patients and should have died. I actually spent 46 days in the intensive care unit where I should not have lived. Top 4 diagnoses on my chart, each one by itself, had a 0.01 survival rate. And God had his hand on me, allowed me to survive. Made it, and I was so sick they forgot to give me nutrition. As a result, I lost 75 pounds of muscle mass. 3 different times they told my wife to come in the middle of the night because I wasn't going to survive and make it through the night. But God allowed me to live and helped me through that whole experience. And then I had to go through over a year of rehab just to be able to learn to walk again and going through that. But I got home and all of a sudden I found out I couldn't walk up a flight of stairs without almost passing out because I couldn't breathe. I found out that, I was an athlete all my life. I was a former Air Force veteran. I was in decent shape, but all of a sudden I couldn't do any of these things. So then went on, and God allowed me to get better, and I got ready to go back to work. Had my flu shot and went back to work, and despite having my flu shot, second day on the job, I got sick again and got admitted to the hospital, into the intensive care unit, where once again I almost died and should have died. And they then determined I'm the only known person in the world where the main muscle allows you to breathe is the diaphragm, and half of mine is paralyzed. As a result, I only have 40% lung function. Only the left side of my lung works. And that's why I could never have good respirations, good breathing. Made it through that hospitalization. Then my second son, Mark, was born. I'm blessed with 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. And Mark was born, took a week off paternity leave, and then came back to the hospital and got called into a important meeting where basically every one of my bosses was there, and they informed me that I became a medical legal risk to the hospital. And instead of practicing, they did not terminate my job, they terminated my career and said I could never practice medicine again. So I then took the hardest job I ever had in my life, and that was become Mr. Mom for my 2 boys. And when Mark was 8 months old, he had his first seizure. It lasted over 4 hours. And then fast forward, by the time he was 18 months old, we got the diagnosis of Dravet syndrome, a very rare genetic seizure disorder. And by the time he was 2, we got the diagnosis of autism. And so my wife's a pediatrician, I'm a pediatrician. We served a lot of individuals with special needs. But it was the first time in our life we finally understood how difficult it is to be a parent of a child with special needs. It's 24/7, 365. You just never, ever get a break. And it's very, very difficult. And then moving forward, now about 14 years ago next week, we'll mark the anniversary of my son being born into heaven at the age of 5.5. So we were blessed with him for 5.5 years, learned the highs and lows of being a parent, then walked through the grief of losing a child. But I want to start off by saying, would you have this child in your church? Would you have this child in your children's ministry? Well, unfortunately today, the majority of churches would not. In fact, only 11% of churches today welcome individuals with disabilities in their families. 11%. 89% literally turn them away and say you're not welcome. My friends, that's not right. And most importantly, it's not biblical. And we're going to get to that in a minute. Now, my son, he appears completely normal. But I can't tell you how many times as a parent, complete strangers would come up to me and tell me that I'm not just a bad parent, I'm a horrible parent because my son is having an autistic meltdown. Or on 5 occasions, he's harming himself, hurting himself, and I'm trying to protect him. And on 5 occasions, I would have police officers come up and pull their gun on me and threaten to arrest me or threaten to tase me because they thought I was endangering my son. Folks, that's the everyday life for a parent of a child with special needs. It's 24/7, 365. The stress is sky high, and you cannot understand it unless you live it yourself. So let's take a minute and talk about some of the numbers with special needs so we can understand the importance of this. Currently today, according to the CDC, 26% of the US population today has a diagnosis of special needs or disabilities. That makes them the largest minority group in the United States. By this time next year, the CDC is expecting that number to be 37%, 1/3 of this country. Now, the important thing to remember, this is the only minority group that affects everybody. It affects all ages, all socioeconomic, and truly all ethnic groups. And it's the only minority group that you can join at any point in your lifetime. And in fact, if you live long enough, 100% of us will be in this minority group. I am now in this minority group. I'm now disabled. I only have 40% lung function. I never thought I would be in this minority group, but I am. And the church is not there to help these families. At the same time, currently it's about 1 out of every 6 to 1 out of every 5 kids in the country have special needs. That number is going to rise this year, probably to 1 out of every 4. And it's currently 1 out of every 4 to 1 out of every 5 adults has a diagnosis of special needs or disability in the country. The other thing to realize is our school system for elementary students and high school students. Currently today in the US, the average is 15% of our children in elementary and high school are receiving special education. So let's come back to the church. If your church doesn't have at least 26% of its congregation with a disability or special needs, or your children's ministry doesn't have at least 15% with special needs, you're not serving your community. The community around you is there, but they're not coming. And it's the largest unmet people group, and we'll get there in a minute. At the same time, we need to realize that divorce is sky high in this group. It is estimated that families with disabilities have a divorce rate of between 80 and 90%. 90. You add a medical illness like seizures or diabetes, that jumps to 95%. It's because the stress is sky high. That's an equal number to combat war veterans as well as professional athletes. But there are wonderful organizations that help those groups. There's no one out there helping individuals with special needs. But it all comes down to parenting a child with special needs is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, 365-day-a-year job that is incredibly stressful. You cannot just go and ask the neighbor girl to come babysit. So these parents are strapped and need help and need assistance. But for every one individual that you see who appears like they have a special needs or disability, there are 4 more people with what we call hidden disabilities. They appear completely normal. My son has a hidden disability. He appeared completely normal. That's why everyone would tell us we are bad parents. It was his autism, and we need more education with that. But hidden disabilities include mental health, anxiety, depression. It includes bipolar with that, post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, just trauma in general. It also includes ADD, intellectual learning disabilities, and many more. But let's just talk a minute about some of the mental health and what we see now. And this is from NAMI, it's National Organization of Mental Illness. And according to them, today 1 out of every 5 children between the ages of 13 and 18 have serious mental illness. 1 out of every 5. Now let's take to the next one. 1 out of every 5 adults in America have a diagnosis of mental illness today. And nearly half of all nearly half of all chronic mental illness begins before the age of 14. So we have all these individuals, especially kids, who are experiencing mental health, and they are also being excluded from the church. So when I'm talking about special needs and disabilities, we include this along with it. And then at the same time, when we actually break down mental health in different types of mental illness by diagnosis, 18% of American adults today have an anxiety disorder. That's a huge number. 7% have major depression. So it's all around us, and we need to be prepared and work with them. So let's now start talking about why is a disability ministry important? Why should your church welcome these families? Well, first off, for families with disabilities, 90% of families with an individual with disability do not attend church. 90%, 90. And there's 3 reasons for it. First, they're afraid the church is not prepared to take care of their child. Well, we know that already, that is true. We just saw only 11% of churches are even welcoming families with disabilities. So that's right on. Second, they know what a burden their child is, so they don't want to be a burden to the church, so they don't come. And then the third reason, and this is what breaks my heart, they've been asked to leave the church too many times before, and they are afraid God has given up on them. My friends, God has never given up on them, but it is the people in the church who allow fear to push them away. And when we don't understand something, we act like an ostrich and put our head in the sand and put our hands out and say, I don't want that. That is not what we're supposed to do, and there's a biblical mandate that we have to follow. But families with disabilities are the largest unmet people group in the United States. So let's see what this actually looks like, all right? So this is a picture. This can be your church and your community. I've got a picture of the church with homes surrounding it. This can be anywhere in the United States. Every single one of these dots represents a house with an individual with disability. That's 26% of the homes. So allow that to sink in. We're talking about a large number of homes that are in your community that we need to reach out. Now, let's really drive it home. 10% are actually going to church. That's the red dots. So only 10% are red dots. They're connected to a church. Look at that lush, unmet people group that are longing to have a church to go to, but they don't have a church because the church is not welcoming them. So my prayer today is that you're going to realize that we are being called to do this. It is a biblical mandate. So let's go right into that and see what the Bible has to say about individuals with special needs. So first off, many years ago, I was getting ready to preach, and God laid it on my heart to list every miracle that we have recorded in the Bible that Jesus did. And as I listed those all out, I quickly added it up. Over 75% of Jesus' miracles were on individuals with special needs and disabilities. Think about it. He healed the lame, he healed the blind, he healed the deaf. And if we really want to be more like Jesus, he was the very first special needs pastor. He constantly went to those with disabilities. Why? Because each individual with special needs is still created in the image and likeness of God. They are not a mistake. God created them on purpose and for a purpose. And they are just as much of the family of God as you and I are. But let's get into really the meat of this. Luke 14 is where we get our biblical mandate for why we need to welcome families with disabilities. And so let me set this up. This is the great wedding banquet. And the great wedding banquet, again, representing the church, the banquet, the table being the church. And the bridegroom comes up to Jesus and says, Rabbi, I've invited all my family, all of our guests, and there's still room at the table. Again, the table being the church. And this is Jesus' reply. And we're in Luke 14, verses 12 to 14. Let me read it. And he says, Then he also said to him who invited him, When you give a dinner or a supper, do not ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, nor rich neighbors, lest they also invite you back, and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. For you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. So let's break that down and see what this is actually saying. First off, this is a perfect picture of inclusion. Why? Because those with disabilities need the church just as much as the church needs those with disabilities. They go hand in hand. If you want to have a world-class church, if you want to have a world-class children's ministry, if you want to have a world-class student ministry, if you want to have a world-class ministry of any kind, you have to welcome families with disabilities. Because it's impossible to be world-class without having individuals with disabilities. They go together. But this is an absolute beautiful picture and model of inclusion. But here's how important this is. It's one of the few times in Scripture that Jesus immediately gives the command again in the next verses that follow. And here is where we actually see Jesus says it again. But this time he gives it a little differently. This time he says, go now into the street, bring the lame, bring in the blind, bring in the deaf, and give them a seat of honor at the table. So let's break down and why, so that you'll be blessed. So why? What is he actually saying? Jesus, first off, don't miss what he said at first. He said, go now, go today. There's two parts of that. One, we're being told and ordered and commanded, go today. We don't wait until we have the volunteers. We don't wait until we have the families. We don't wait until we have the training, until we have the money, until everything's perfect. We go now. Two, it's an active part of going. We go out and we help find the families and we bring them in. It has to be active on our part that we're actually welcoming them. We just don't stand and say, oh, they'll come to us. We have to be going out and doing that. But in the way to have it truly be like a piece of heaven, we need to have ministry with and by individuals with disabilities. We don't want to just put them in a room or put them somewhere and have glorified babysitting. We need to have ministry where we're doing ministry with them, and they need to be placed in leadership where they're able to do ministry to others and the ministry by them. That's what this is all about. But then he goes on and says, why do you do this? So that you will be blessed. I'm telling you, your church will be blessed. I mentioned it a little bit earlier. My church, I ended up starting a disability ministry. I started with 3 individuals, recruited 20 volunteers. 8 years later, we're serving 800 individuals with disabilities and 2,500 volunteers. Went from 1 campus to 3 campuses. My friends, that's God's blessing. God will always provide, and he wants to provide, but this is God's sweet spot. This is where God truly loves the least of these. And when we welcome them and we honor God the way he commands us to, he is going to provide. And so if your church really wants to be more like Jesus, you're going to welcome families with disabilities. So what does this look like? This is one of my favorite pictures I've ever seen. Several years ago, I got to go just not too far from here to the Johnny and Friends worldwide headquarters. And this is a mural on the wall at Johnny and Friends that depicts this. And this is really what this is like, where we have a banquet that everybody is at. You see Jesus there. Actually, you see Johnny Erickson Tada right there in the middle. But you see those with disabilities and those without. And we're celebrating life hand in hand right next to each other. Individuals with disabilities are serving others, and those without disabilities are serving. It's ministry with and it's ministry by. This is the true picture of what Jesus is talking about in Luke 14 and what our goal should be as we move forward with that. But what else does the Bible have to say? Well, let's go to 1 Corinthians 12:23. And that says, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And on those parts of the body we think are less honorable, we bestow the greater honor. God is telling us these people are not the lesser. They have a great honor, and we are missing the mark by not having them in our church. Now here's the next one. And this is one of my favorite things, and God definitely did this on purpose, because many people say, oh, you know, it's okay. They've got a disability because of sin in somebody's life, of the parent or the individual. Jesus takes care of that and says, no, that is not the point. In John chapter 9, verses 1-3, it says, now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. What is it all about? It's so that we can see the works of God. That is what individuals with disabilities are all about, seeing God being glorified. And if you've ever worked with an individual with disability, you can just see the love of God being poured out of them. They're the ones who truly get it. So let's sum it all up. What is Jesus' view when it comes to disabilities? It is that people with disabilities are no different from those without. They belong to a body of believers, and they are capable of using their unique giftedness to do God's work. There is no difference. And in fact, when I go and look at the Great Commission, what does that say? Go into all the world and share the gospel, preach the gospel. Well, my friends, when I read the Great Commission, there is no disclaimer on that. It doesn't say only if you have an IQ over 70, only if you are fully able, go do it. It's all. We are all called to share the gospel. No matter what our gifting, our ability is. We are all called. And we need to treat that the same way as the church. We need to welcome every individual into our church, no matter what it's like. So our attitude towards disabilities needs to be completely shaped by God. There are many diagnoses and many descriptions of disabilities, but ultimately, we're talking about people. We're not talking about conditions or syndromes or labels. Just remember that each person is completely created in the image and likeness of God, and they have immense innate value. A disability, no matter what kind, no matter what severity, does not make anyone less of a human being. Every living, breathing person has a spirit that is capable of responding to the Holy Spirit. So never assume that anyone is beyond the ability of God to touch their lives in some significant way. They are created on purpose and for a purpose. So, what exactly is a disability ministry? Bottom line, it exists to impart the Word of God in the hearts of all individuals in an engaging and understandable manner, and to teach them to love, to know, and to honor God. Bottom line is, the church needs to be a place of refuge where the families know that their individual with special needs is loved on and taught the love of Jesus. They go together. So how do we define special needs in regard to ministry and the church? Well, basically the way I defined it is any need a family member may need, any age, whoever it is, that requires some forethought in order to ensure that that family's church experience is meaningful and safe. So this includes severe allergies, it includes medical issues, it includes cognitive differences, it includes everything. It's not just physical disabilities. It includes everything, and we got to be ready for that. But here's the bottom line. A special needs ministry is actually a ministry to the entire family. It's not just to the individual with special needs. Because you have to serve the siblings, and you have to serve the parents, and then you're also serving the grandparents. It's the only ministry that goes throughout every single ministry in the church. Every ministry in the church is affected by special needs. And you need to be aware of that and respond with that. You might be saying, what do you mean with that? Well, two things. First, no one should ever age out of your disability ministry. So if you start with something in the children's ministry, that child in elementary will eventually be a middle schooler, and you have to have something for them. And eventually they're going to be a high schooler, and you need to have programming for them. And then they're going to be out of high school and be an adult, and you need to have something for them. So you need to plan ahead and be prepared for that. But here's the thing. What you do in children's doesn't work in middle school and high school, and what you do for middle school and high school doesn't work for adults. So we got to be willing to understand we have to meet the needs of our individuals as we go through. But when I say it has to work with every single ministry, we have to think through how other ministries work. So I'm going to use worship as an example. What happens when most worship leaders stand up before your congregation? The majority of worship leaders say, "Would you please stand and worship with us this morning?" Well, that's great, but what if someone is in a wheelchair and they can't stand? Or grandma just had a hip replacement and she can't stand. Or grandpa or dad just had a knee replacement and they can't stand. I've actually had conversation with these people, and their answer to me is, I feel like I'm being told I cannot worship God today because I'm unable to stand. That's not our heart. I know that's not the worship leader's heart. So now many worship leaders are saying, well, if you're able, please stand and join us. They still feel like they're not welcomed because they're not able to stand. So I come in and I train churches to do what we really need them to do. I come and say, tell them what you really want them to do. So here's how I train a worship leader. If I were the worship leader, I'd get in front of the church and I'd say, would you please join us today in worshiping from your heart? Doesn't that do it? Isn't that what we really want? We want to worship God from our heart. And that way, if we stand, fantastic. If we sit, great. If we do cartwheels all the way down the aisle, praise God. We all worship God in our own way. We've got to be willing to allow that to happen and know that everybody is different. And just because someone's doing something different than you doesn't make it bad. And sometimes individuals with special needs are gonna be loud. They're gonna be different, but that's okay. One of my adult that I told you I started with, he was 26 years old, had Fragile X, and he was nonverbal, he couldn't talk, but he absolutely loved our worship. And as soon as worship started in our church service, he would charge the stage, and we had a big 5-foot stage, and he'd charge the stage, and he'd stand right next to it, and he had perfect beat. He would beat on the stage with the drum, and he would be quiet until we all started singing. And as soon as we started singing, this is what you heard. Ah! And as soon as he did that, the church, a lot of people went quiet. They're looking at each other and talking to one another, and they were upset. Many people got up and left. And the worship pastor came to me and said, Doc, you have to help him be quiet. That's disruptful to the church. So I replied back, I said, wait, aren't we wanting to show worship? And he goes, of course, but that's not worship. I go, show me how it's not worship. He only does that when you sing. And he doesn't start making that noise until everyone starts singing. That's his form of worship. There's no question in my heart, he knows the Lord and Savior as his personal Lord and Savior, and he loves God, and he's worshiping God. Because he's doing it in a different way that we don't understand doesn't make it wrong. And he's like, I never thought about that. Guess what happened the next week? He does the whole same thing. People start looking. We finish the song. Our worship leader turns to him and calls him out by name and says, I wish the rest of this church would worship as open and freely as you do. The church changed. No one complained anymore because they realized it was worship. And so it's part of our job to bring awareness to everyone else. But there should be 4 goals of a disability ministry in your church. The first and most important one is we have to open the door to be able to share the gospel with families affected by special needs. And we need to introduce them to a personal relationship with God. That's number 1. Second, we have to integrate those with disabilities into the life of the church and give them opportunities to actively serve God. Remember, it's ministry with and ministry by. Third, we have to enable the church to serve as a witness to the community by meeting the spiritual, the physical, and the social needs of families affected by special needs. And then fourth, the most important, is we have to become a belonging community. Ministry with and ministry by. And I've stolen this from Dr. Eric Carter. I love it, and I'm using it with his permission. But he defines this as everyone is to be present, invited, welcomed, known, accepted, supported, cared for, befriended, needed, and loved. In order to become a belonging community, ministry with and by, let me say that again. They have to be present. They have to be invited. They have to be welcomed. They have to be known. They have to be accepted, supported, cared for, befriended, needed, and loved. That's what this is all about. And we do that by welcoming them in and sharing Christ's love to them. So the bottom line is we want to actually become an inclusive church of belonging. So what does that mean? Basically what it means is that we want all of our individuals with special needs to feel that they are just as valued, just as important as everyone else who walks into your church, as everyone else that comes into that Sunday school class. And inclusive classrooms are rooms where all students are vital members of the classroom, and they feel a connection to their peers, and they have access to meaningful general curriculum, but they may need some additional support to succeed. They may need to have a volunteer, a buddy who's a friend on the side helping them. But we have to create a culture of acceptance. We need to allow visibility in the church and in our events, and allow it to be seen from the stage, from the pulpit. We need to allow our individuals to serve. I had one of our, and you'll see a picture later, one of our individuals became a greeter at one of our doors and hand out the bulletin, severe cerebral palsy, in a wheelchair. And I had to fight to get him to do that. Our welcoming team did not want that because he couldn't talk. And so I said, I will help him and do it. Guess what happened that next Sunday? 75% of our people came in his side of the door because they wanted to see him. They wanted to smile at him and just shake his hand. And then they walked across the church to go sit in their regular seat because we all know we all have our regular seats, and God forbid we don't sit in our regular seat. But they still wanted to be blessed with that and go through. Oh, thank you. And so, the other thing, like I said then, is no one should ever age out of your ministry program. And then we want to make sure we give support to them in a way that you would want to be supported. But again, the true goal with all of this is that we are becoming a belonging church. Like I said earlier, ministry with and ministry by. Everyone's present, invited, welcomed, known, accepted, supported, cared for, befriended, needed, and loved. But a better way to understand this maybe is to put it, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to the dance. Belonging is being missed when you don't attend the party. So let me repeat that and think about that so you understand the difference. Diversity is just being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to the dance. But belonging, what we really want as a church, is being missed when you don't attend the party. Folks, we need to be grieving, missing our individuals when they're not here, instead of not even recognizing it. That's part of becoming a belonging community. So, let's start talking. How do I start? What do I do to create a ministry? And you might say, we don't have the space, we don't have the time, we don't have the people, we don't have the money. Stop making excuses. It's a biblical mandate. There are no excuses, period. You start small. You start with what you have. I promise you, each church here, you have someone with special needs in your church. You don't know it. And they're not telling you they have it because they're afraid if they tell you, you're going to ask them to leave. So you find out what their needs are and you meet their needs and work through that. But we currently have that. If you want, you can create a survey and survey your church to see what kind of needs are truly there. But you start small. You heard my story earlier. I said I started with just what we had. We had 3 people, and we grew that over time. Now, here's the other thing. I want to, right now, take care of a myth that's out there. And that myth is if you build it, they will come. That doesn't happen, okay? Let me explain it. And you might be going, hold on, time out, Doc. You built it, they came. You went from 3 to 800, 20 to 2,500. That's building it, they came. Yes, but it didn't happen like that. It started real slow. So let me help you understand. If you're a parent I want you to think about being a parent. Are you about to drop your child off somewhere unless you know that for sure that they know how to take care of your child? Absolutely not. You're not about to do that. Even if they say on a website that they have great child care, you're not about to do it unless you know for sure they know what they're doing and they're safe. Now, have a child with special needs, where the needs are much higher and your concern is much higher. And you know you can't just have anybody do it. You're really not going to take someone's word for it because they have a shingle on the church, or it's on their website, or it's in the bulletin. You're not going to take their word for it. How does it grow? It grows by the people you already have in the church that you start serving. And then those families will go and talk to the disability community. The special needs disability community is tight. They're a close-knit group. And they'll go and say, hey, you know what, Susie, you need to come and visit my church because they're doing a great job with Tommy. And I know they're doing a great job with Tommy. They definitely do a great job with, Carol, your daughter. You ought to come. Oh, okay. Well, if they're doing a great job with Tommy, yeah, we'll try it out next Sunday. So it grows slowly. So don't think it's going to happen all overnight. But then the next thing we have to do is designate a special needs ministry champion. We need to have a person who's going to be responsible for this ministry to help recruit for it. And then I want you to build the team. Now, this person is going to be helping get the vision for it and be the major cheerleader for this ministry. It might be you. You're sitting here today, and that might be you at your church. And then, this person doesn't have to be on staff. They can be a volunteer, and they can even be a parent. I always say, I've got one requirement to be a volunteer. It's a simple question. Can you be a friend? Can you be a friend? That's where it all starts. You don't have to have any experience. It just starts with being a friend. And then we can teach you everything else. But this ministry champion, then, I want you to build a leadership team. And with this leadership team, you can maybe talk to special education teacher that might be in your church. Most special education teachers are not going to want to help out every single week because they deal with it all week long at work. They want a break on the weekend. But when you ask them to be part of the leadership team to create vision and plans and procedures and meet once a month, they'd love to do that. So that's a great way to go about it. And then I always want a parent on this leadership team so that you have someone who can speak into if the ministry you're trying to do actually makes sense for a family with special needs. Because many times if you don't have a child with disability, you might come up with ministry ideas that really won't work well for a family with a disability. But then next, you're going to need to talk with senior leadership if you haven't already. And you need to share your plan, share your vision, and help break any myths that are out there. And we're going to get into myths here in just a second, but we need to break those myths and help them through that. So let's just take a minute and talk about how we can get senior leadership on board. And I've now done ministry in a church where senior leadership was completely opposed. And in fact, they told me they don't want people like my son at their church. But I was still able to start a special needs ministry. And then do ministry at a church where senior leadership was completely on board, where I was at my church that started SOAR at. And so it really makes a difference with senior leadership. But getting senior leadership of churches on board to start a disability ministry, it truly can be a challenging endeavor. However, with the right approach and the information, it is possible to make a case for why disability ministry is important and why it should be given priority. First, it's important to recognize disability ministry is not just a nice-to-have ministry. It is need. In fact, it is no longer an elective for a church. It is now a requirement. Every church is called to do this. We just saw that in Luke 14. People with disabilities are often left out of church activities and leadership because of misconceptions about their abilities and their potential. And this is a huge missed opportunity, as people with disabilities have unique gifts and talents that can completely enrich the church and its mission. But secondly, because it's important to articulate the need for disability ministry in terms that will resonate with the senior leadership of churches, disability ministry can actually benefit the entire church, because you're creating a more welcoming and a more inclusive environment. It can be a powerful tool for evangelism. And I'll get into that here in just a minute. But as people with disabilities are often less exposed to the gospel, we'll be sharing the gospel with them. And then third, it's important to demonstrate that a disability ministry can be successful. Share success stories from other churches. Provide statistics of how disability ministry has benefited other churches. Include information on resources that are available to help make the disability ministry successful. I always tell churches, let them know about SOAR. We exist to help you do better. And we can do training. We can help you develop everything needed. No, you don't have to do it alone. I learned all the pitfalls. I found all the pitfalls as I was doing it on my own. I can now come alongside a church and help them avoid that. But we want to include information on resources that are necessary to help make disability ministry successful, such as, what kind of qualified staff, the volunteers, and what financial resources are really needed. It's not going to break the bank. We're not talking about thousands and thousands of dollars. And then finally, it's important to emphasize the importance of creating a culture of inclusion. Emphasize that disability ministry should be seen as part of the church's outreach efforts, and that it should be a priority. And we have to present a compelling case of why disability ministry isn't necessary. And it's actually the senior leadership responsibility to be on board and to start this. And with the right approach and the right information, we can actually become a more welcoming and inclusive environment and work through it. So what I have found is just about every church I know has a care ministry. And care ministry, let's break that down, it's usually dealing with adults, and it includes things like benevolence, counseling, hospital, nursing, visitation teams, visitation for homebound, doing weddings, funerals, prayer teams, support teams, and sometimes they might even have a respite program for people. But the support teams can include like divorce care, grief share, meal trains, handymans, moving teams, all these different things. Well, now let's talk about a disability ministry. Disability ministry is for children and adults, and few churches do this. What does it include? It includes a buddy, a volunteer, a guide on the side on the weekend. It includes family support groups, maybe doing some respite care, maybe doing missions trips, camps, Bible study, sibling groups. So where are we having the problems? Why aren't more churches doing this? For me, the vast majority of pastors I've met truly want their churches to reach their community and grow. So my question is, where is the disconnect when it comes to families with disabilities? I truly believe that if the pastor hasn't experienced disability through a friend or a family member, they are just ignorant, are not aware of the fact that disability affects every community, all ethnicities, all ages, and all social classes. So this is also why care ministries exist in every church. Every church has a children's ministry because senior leadership knows if you don't have children's ministry, you're not going to grow your church. But they have care ministries because they've seen the church work with their parents. They've seen the impact on that and the need for that. They've experienced that. They just haven't experienced with individuals with disabilities. So if your senior leadership sees value in including children, youth, adults, senior adults, then they should see value in including persons with disability, because disability affects every single one of those groups. So why is there still such a massive movement to include people with disabilities? Isn't there a massive movement to include people with disabilities in the church? I truly believe the vast majority of pastors have no idea how to include people with disabilities and their families into the life of the church. And it just comes simply down to a lack of understanding and a lack of education. And so that's where our job comes in. We have to see value in disabilities. God created and welcomes all people into fellowship with him. So who are we to discriminate based on someone's ability? It is the senior leadership's lack of understanding and education that leads to fear and then unending list of concerns they have in starting a disability ministry. So we need to help our senior leadership see value in individuals with disabilities and invite your pastor and his family to dinner. And then I go in and I invite a family with disability to the same dinner and have them bring their child. And the best way to learn is by breaking bread together and sharing stories of what life is like and how things really are. And what I always tell the family with the individual with disability is do not be praying to have your child on good behavior. I want them to see what life is really like. And so while they're breaking bread, I want the family member to talk just how difficult it is to be able to attend church. I did this with one family, and mom sat there. She has 3 kids. One of them is a 9-year-old with autism. He's nonverbal. And the church was trying to start doing special needs service at the 8 o'clock service because they had space. They thought that would work best. And so this mom sat there and she bravely told the pastor, that will never work for our family or anyone else. She said, for my son, he's 9 years old. I have to get up, I wake him up, I get him dressed to go to church. Then I go wake up my other boys, I get them dressed, I come back, Johnny's naked. I have to get him dressed again. And then I go and I make breakfast for the kids. Come back, Johnny's naked again. I have to get him dressed again, second time. Then I go, I get my shower, and then I come back downstairs, Johnny's naked again. I have to redress him, third time. Then I go make sure my husband's up and he's all ready. Then I come back, Johnny's naked again. I have to get him dressed the 4th time. And then I go to make sure everyone else has everything ready. We're ready to go out the door. We're already 10 minutes late. Oh, Johnny's naked again. But this time, he had to go to the bathroom and he smeared poop all over the wall because I wasn't there to wipe him. And the pastor's sitting there with his mouth wide open. And he goes, why can't he dress himself? And why can't he wipe himself? And she said, because he's a child with special needs and he's never going to be able to. I'm going to have to do this his entire life. And all of a sudden, the pastor had the aha moment. He never realized that. And she said, I start my process at 6 a.m., and we're lucky to be there at 9:30. If you try to push us at 8 o'clock, we're never going to be able to come to your church, and we're going to have to find a different church. It's that awareness that helped the pastor realize what was happening. So we've got to realize what's going on and being able to break bread together and see how that can work. But there are many myths that we hear from leadership. And I want to just share, these are actual myths that I've heard from senior leadership. Here are some of them. We don't have anyone with disabilities in our church. Why do we need a ministry? Other churches near us have a disability ministry, therefore we don't need to have one. Just send them there. Well, other churches have children's ministry too. Do we send them there? Other churches have worship ministries, but we still do them. I'm just too concerned about liability issues and being sued. It's too expensive and we just don't have the budget. We don't know where or how to start. It's just too hard and scary. What if we mess something up or say the wrong thing? We don't want to get a backlash from anyone. We don't have people with the right qualifications or to lead a ministry like that, nor do we have the resources. Our outreach ministry already supports a group that assists people with disabilities. It's not the church I want to attend. We don't need another ministry. We don't need a whole program just for a couple of individuals. We need volunteers more urgently in other ministries right now. We are a small church. Only big churches need to do it. We don't want to be overrun by needy families. The staff is already extremely busy and are unable to oversee another ministry, even if a lay leader manages it. If we start it, they will come. We just can't handle that. It doesn't fit with our mission statement. Well, I'm sorry, you need a new mission statement because you're not a biblical church. It's just not a need at our church. And then we don't have the room. These are all myths. Not a single one of them is legit. And so let's break down a couple of them. But to do it, I want to talk about the 3 C's of a disability ministry when it comes to the understanding. First, we have to comprehend, understand what inclusion is. Next, we need to communicate. We need to cast vision of inclusion. And then we need to collaborate, work towards inclusion. So let's break each one of these down. Let's talk about the first one, comprehending. We need to actually change philosophy of ministry. Inclusion ministry is less about starting a ministry to persons with disabilities than it is about changing your philosophy of ministry to include persons with disability. They're already in your church. Let's address that and serve them. It's not adding a new ministry. It is including individuals with disabilities into the existing ministries. That's what it's all about. You don't have to hire a special education teacher or a medical professional to include individuals with disabilities. Children with special needs are born to parents with no prior experience who simply love their child and get to know them. I'm a physician and I'm a parent. I've never given out an instruction manual as a physician. I never received an instruction manual as a parent on how to take care of my child. I learned by spending time with him and being a friend and learning that. That's what we're talking about. But comprehension of inclusion comes from relationships. It's all relationships, being a friend. The only requirement there is to serve in the ministry is simply being a friend. Then next we have to communicate. We have to communicate what, why, and how before you do it with your leadership team and the rest of your team. And this helps them then to understand why, and then when they can communicate this to the congregation prior to launching anything. And we need to include how we address someone with special needs. We want to use first-person terminology. It's the boy with Down syndrome, the girl with cerebral palsy. It's not the autistic boy. We don't first use the diagnosis. Or let's use what I actually prefer. It's Tommy. It's Susie. Let's call them by their name. They've all been given a God-given name. Let's not even allow the diagnosis to be what we call them. That doesn't need to be part of that. But we have to have effective communication starting at the top and then it trickles down. We need to create an elevator speech to share the vision. It needs to be short, 60 to 90 seconds, basically the length of an elevator ride, and make sure the entire team can share this. And it prevents vision leak among your team. And say it frequently. Because again, the Great Commission, go and make disciples. Again, there is no prerequisite on it. We're all called to do that. And then we're called to collaborate, work towards inclusion. All existing ministries need to work together to be the most effective. The majority of kids and adults with disabilities can be included in existing ministries with little support or adaptation. And it's the changing of philosophy of ministry to include individuals of all abilities. But the teams need to all be on the same page. We need to have parking lot attendants, greeters, teachers, all need to be trained. One of my favorite examples I ever did, I trained our first impressions team that comes in contact with first-time visitors. And part of that was our parking lot greeters and attendants. Well, one of the things I teach in my training is that individuals with special needs, they have a hard time transitioning, going from one thing to another, because the way the brain is wired, they can't just snap quickly to something and change. It takes them a little bit of time, especially if it's something brand new. And I said, especially today, if you're ever in public and you see an elementary age child or a middle school, high schooler who's air quote misbehaving, That's not misbehavior. That today is autism. It's 1 out of every 33 individuals. That's autism. And so we need to be aware of that. I trained our parking lot attendants. That next day we had special parking spots for first-time visitors. A family parked there. They had 2 elementary kids. They had a hard time getting one of the boys out of the car. This gentleman went up and just started talking to him. Hey, is this your first time here? It was enough of a distraction. They got the other boy out of the car. He's like, great, let me walk you in to our check-in team. You know, we have a great children's ministry here. We have a good student ministry. We also have a special needs ministry here. Mom goes, oh, fantastic. Johnny has autism. The attendant goes, great, we have SOAR. They're our special needs ministry. Doc or someone from the team will come and talk to you. They go start filling out the paperwork, checking in. They called me. I come out and talk to them. My very first question I have for any family with disability, my very first question after getting their name, I don't even want to know the diagnosis. My first question, tell me something wonderful about your child. Tell me something wonderful about your child. Mom started telling me, oh, he's got autism, he's nonverbal. I'm like, nope, time out. I want to know something wonderful. Because God created him on purpose and for a purpose. I know there's something wonderful about him. Tell me what it is. Guess what happens next? Mom and dad start crying because no one has ever asked them that question before. Same thing, just thinking with that, the other thing that never happens, nobody ever asks an individual with special needs what they want to do when they get older. We just assume they can't. We have to change and include them. Hey, what do you want to do when you get older? And empower them to dream. But this mom said, oh, with tears coming down her face, Johnny loves to draw. He's an amazing artist. So I get down on Johnny's level and I say, hey, Johnny, you know what? I've got some pretty cool markers and paper. Can you draw me a picture? He lights up and just smiles. And I get a thumbs up from him. So I talk to mom and dad, get the information I need. And I say, okay, let's go back to his class. Mom goes, nope, Doc, he's not going to go. This is the 6th church in a row we've tried, and he will never move. We can't get him past the foyer. So instead, I go, hey, Johnny, let's go get that marker and paper, and let's start drawing some pictures. He jumps up, grabs my hand. We skip all the way down the hallway. I say, hey, here's our room right over here. He runs in. I go to the table. He went to the table. I got him his markers. He went there. I got him a buddy to work with him. He did marvelous. I drop off sibling. He did great. And then I take mom and dad up to the church sanctuary for worship. And this is the statement I'm never going to forget in my life and the impact of all of this. Mom sat there with tears pouring down her face. Dad's completely choked up, can't say a word. And mom said, Doc, I have no idea what your senior pastor's about to preach today. He can tell me that Satan sits on the throne of heaven. This is our new home church. Because no church has ever accepted our family the way that Christ wants us to be loved and accepted us for who we are and shown the true love of Jesus. Well, I'm glad to say we never preached that, and that family stayed with us. And it's all because we trained and we helped everyone in the church realize what this is all about. So we need to have everyone trained. We need to develop goals. We need to develop plans. And then we need to break these myths with senior leadership and everyone else. We need to change our objections to objectives. And this, in the world of special needs and inclusion, it's a huge black box of unknown. And we've got to change that. Even elderly respite care is unknown for many leadership teams, but it's due to this lack of knowledge and unknowns that makes us quickly dismissed. So again, changing objection to objectives. And let's just break down a couple of these. First one I heard a lot, there's just a lack of interest in this ministry. Well, you know what? When we include individuals with special needs into the life of the church, we are showing love and compassion to an unreached people group who are frequently marginalized and misunderstood. And this leads to an engaging and exciting ministry. And having a leader who is passionate and also able to share vision will just grow interest in others and help us be able to recruit both within and outside the church. The next one I hear a lot is, oh, we have a lack of budget. We don't have the money for this ministry. Here's the great thing. It doesn't take a lot of money to start a ministry because it's based on relational and attention, just like every other ministry. Most sensory items are free or can be donated. In fact, fidget toys that we can use. The best fidget toys are McDonald's Happy Meal toys. 80% make perfect fidget toys. Ask parents to donate them. Because as soon as the kids get done playing with them at McDonald's, they come home, drop them on the floor, and all that happens is parents step on them with bare feet and hurt their foot. So parents are happy to get rid of them. But you can actually develop a sensory room or sensory corner or sensory boxes for as little as $250 to $500 and grow it as your ministry grows. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. But ministry can actually function on whatever size budget you have or you don't have. Liability, this is one I hear a lot. And actually, we just had a big talk with the church this week about it. Liability issues for the ministry. Well, you know what? Ministry can be messy at times and be risky. Just read the gospel. If we go back and read the gospels and see Jesus' ministry on earth was messy. So why do we think we have to have this pristine, clean, nice ministry today? It's unrealistic because Jesus never did. And so we don't need to do that. But we can have a plan to avoid being negligent and decrease liability. We need to train our volunteers. We need to have background check for our volunteers, have waivers with our families. Church insurance policies, they all cover everything without additional charges. Even at my church, when I did a large special needs day camp, 8 hours a day, provided medical care, provided medicine, gave food, it didn't cost us another penny from a liability standpoint. Because from the liability standpoint, they said there's no difference in doing that versus doing a vacation Bible school. And then the one that I loved, the liability insurance company said, the highest liability any church has is a student ministry. That's where most liability comes from, but the things that students do. And so it's not from this. So we just need to be aware we can still be safe and do things and do it right and decrease the liability. Then the next one that's very close to this is there are safety issues for this ministry. So we need to have our parents and caregivers complete a plan of care so that we know what the best way to care for their individual is with special needs. You don't have to recreate this. You can email me. I'll send you our plan of care, take our name off, take our logo off, and put yours on it. At the end, I'll have my email on here, or you can go to our website, see that there. I'm happy to share that with you. But don't give this to them on day one. Because when a family comes to your church, we want to treat them just like we do everyone else that comes to your church. We don't ask the parents of a child with special needs to stay with their child in Sunday school. We need to get other people. We want to treat them just like everyone else. But we want to make sure they're going to be coming to the church. It's going to take about an hour to fill out this plan of care that I have. And so I don't do it until they come to the church 3 or 4 times and have decided they're going to start coming on a regular basis. You can still figure out the other things to take care of. But we want to create action plans for elopement or when they run away. We want to have other safety issues taken care of. Talk to security teams. Have them be part of your elopement runaway plan. Have behavior teams so when behavior happens, you can work through all that. And then the next one, we already hit on a little bit. If they build it, they will come. And I've already said this is a myth. We need to focus on who you already have and do ministry to the best of your ability. Again, like I said, families with disabilities, they're not going to come to your church until they know you are able to handle their individual with special needs. And they hear good compliments from other people through word of mouth. That average takes 18 to 24 months. So it's going to be a slow process. That even happened with us at SOAR. And it wasn't until we started doing outside events that it really started growing. The other one, and this is a real one, the church already has a shortage of volunteers. Well, the beauty is special needs ministry raises a whole new class of volunteers who are not currently serving or engaged in your church. But the other problem is we constantly go after the same group of volunteers in the church. I fully understand we are shooting this at you with a fire hose, lots of information. And again, after the talk, I'll be available to answer any questions you might have. But we do have a lot of the notes there in the handout, and I've got some more extensive notes. You can email me, and I'm happy to share those with you. But I want to talk now about how you do a disability ministry. And we're going to actually define the classroom environment. So the first one is exclusion. And this is what we're talking about the majority of churches. Today, 89% of churches are not welcoming families with disabilities, and they actually turn them away. Or maybe you allow families to attend the church, but you tell the parents that they have to go to Sunday school class with their child to help them in the class because you don't know how to take care of their child. Well, my friends, if you tell a parent that they have to go to the Sunday school class with their child, that is not welcoming. That is telling the parent that they might as well stay at home because they can do the same thing at home. These parents need their spiritual gas tank filled just as much as anyone else. So we got to be aware of that. And then if you are requiring a parent to do anything that a parent of a neurotypical child doesn't need to do, then you are not welcoming and you're actually excluding the family. So the second type is segregation. And this is actually another way you might say is a self-contained classroom. This is where you are welcoming them, but you put them in their own space. And they're not included with the rest of their peers. Having a class designed specifically for children or individuals with special needs, there's no peers in the class. And this is an environment, though, that some of these types are needed with everything, but this is an environment that's best suited for those individuals who do not learn well in or benefit from the typical classroom. So my experience is less than 5 to 10% of students actually need a self-contained classroom. We don't need to put everybody into a self-contained classroom. However, the other one that this is benefits for would be an adult ministry, because your adults aren't really able to usually be in a adult class with peers who are neurotypical, because they'll actually do better in having a class just with themselves. And so the third level is integration. So integration is actually a combination environment. And this is a mixture of both inclusion, which we'll talk about in a minute, and self-contained classrooms, in which you have a self-contained instruction being utilized in a portion of the time, and it's tailored through a typical curriculum, meeting the intellectual needs of participants. Now, there may use the self-contained environment in a small group setting with it. This is actually my preference in a high school setting or junior high setting, where you might have 11th grade girls, 8th grade boys, where you separate by sex and age. Well, our friends, with disabilities, once they hit junior high, 6th grade, I call that the great intellectual divide, where our individuals with disabilities, they start to plateau with their intellectual growth, and their peers take off. And so when we try to have them in their appropriate classrooms, they aren't understanding because all the curriculum's way above them. And so if instead, when we're already breaking everyone out into different groups, we just create another group with our friends with special needs where we can have that at a level that they understand, but we're still able to have them in with the group with everybody to include. And when they're in with everybody else, it's actually going to look more like this, an inclusion. Inclusion is including the child or individual in a typical class where they have a one-on-one buddy who's really an aide or just a volunteer, one person, or sometimes possibly by themselves. But inclusive classrooms, again, are places, like we talked about, where all students are vital members of the classroom and they feel connected with their peers and have access to general education curriculum. But they may need additional support to do well. But they're in with their peers. They're in their age-appropriate room, or they're in their developmentally appropriate classroom. And this is what we've been shooting for years, but now we're learning this is not the gold standard. Our gold standard is to become a church of belonging. And so for belonging, we want to have ministry with and by. So that's where now all of our individuals are included in every part of ministry, but along with that, we pull them out and they're doing ministry themselves. So it's having ministry with and by as we go through this with them. So the next question I have for you is, what portrait here describes the communities that you're a part of? And what role might you play in changing the landscape that we see here? So how else might we be able to describe these different levels? So another way to look at this is, the first one is ministry apart. Exclusion is ministry apart. Segregation is ministry to. We're ministering to them. Integration is really ministry among. Inclusion is ministry with. But then finally, belonging is ministry by. And so what we want is we want ministry with and ministry by. We want that combination of inclusion and belonging. Because, went the wrong way, sorry. Because when we're ministering to, we're just doing right there to that group and there's nothing else. We want to allow them to serve. We want them to, we're all called to share the gospel. We're all called to be volunteers. And we need that to be ministry by, where they're all having a major part of this. And so that's what I want us to be thinking about. That's our ultimate goal. But the best church doing disability ministry will actually be using the last four images there. They will not be using the ministry apart. Ministry apart is only the 89% of churches right now that don't even welcome families with disabilities. That is the one we absolutely don't want. But we want to move as far as we can to the right to do ministry with and ministry by. So now let's take a minute and talk about curriculum. Do you need to do general curriculum versus a special needs curriculum? I usually recommend just doing a general curriculum. Many ministries, especially children's ministry, they use a general children's curriculum, especially if you have an inclusive environment. Most of that curriculum is written at a third grade level, and usually that's effective all the way up through middle elementary and our adults. And then preschool curriculum can be used for our preschool through early elementary. It's also possible that you can edit curriculum to meet your needs. Simplify, repeat, adjust, and accommodate, or just modify it. But you can also get special needs curriculum. There's not a ton out there, it's growing, but several companies are working on developing. The first that I highly recommend is by Ability Ministry. It's actually abilityministry.com. And they've got a phenomenal curriculum that is out there. They've got some written for children, for teens, and adults. Their absolute best is written for adults and their teens. But they actually teach the Bible verses. It's a PowerPoint curriculum. It has video in it. They teach their Bible verses using sign language as well. It's all digital, so it works real well. So even if you've got individuals who are nonverbal, they're going to be able to learn as go through it. The second one there is Lifeway Access. It's excellent. It's written more for adults, 6th grade and on up. The one thing, while it's a great curriculum, I've had a lot of my adults tell me they don't like it. And the reason is it feels childish to them. And adults with disabilities, they don't want to be babied. They want to be treated like adults. And so they've not been real fond of this one because it's got a lot of cartoony type of pictures. That's why they really like the ability ministry, because it's got pictures of adults and it's all very adult driven. And then Heart Shaper, the last one shown there, that's put out by Standard. And this has a special needs friendly symbol in each lesson that marks activities that would be geared towards individuals' special needs, ages 1 to 12. But there's also many, many others that are out there. But the bottom line is you don't have to create a whole new curriculum. There's a lot of great stuff out there. But most of the time, I usually just use the general curriculum, education curriculum that children's ministry is already using. So now let's take a minute and talk about sensory space. What is a sensory space, and do you even need it? Well, a sensory space basically is just an environment where individuals who need a break from typical sensory input or who need sensory input not found in the typical classroom can have their sensory needs met so that they can continue to learn about Jesus. It's an area that's designed to help to engage each person's senses. It is not a place to take an individual when they're having a behavior. That's what happens with most churches. They have a sensory room and they think, oh, that's where I take someone when they're having a bad behavior. You are now, and they stop having the behavior and they're like, oh, it works. No, you just rewarded bad behavior. Because next week, that child's going to have bad behavior again to go to that sensory room because they like the sensory room. So I'll deal with the behavior in their classroom, in the hallway. I'll never take them to the sensory room. But the sensory room is going to be used for while they're, before they get to that behavior. So you start looking and identifying what is triggering everything for them and working through that, or when they need a break. You can also use it as a reward that they work towards something to get. These are examples of things I had in my room, the first room I built. It had a swing, but you start by selecting a space in the church that can be dedicated as a sensory room. Consider a room that has access to natural light, it's quiet. Consider it being away from excessive noise and distractions, but it could be you may not have space. I know many churches are fighting with a lack of space. So it can be a box that you have in each classroom. And you just put some items in the box that the child can use in the back of the room. It can be a corner in the back of a classroom where you might put up a pop-up tent where the child can go in and just kind of block out the world to it. You might be in a portable church. I was in a portable church. One of our campuses was in a school, so we had to set up and tear down every Sunday. And I'll show you an example of one of the things I did with that. Well, actually, I'll show it here. So this first one, that's their swing. The next one's a sensory board that I had a volunteer build. If you purchase a sensory board, you're usually talking about $3,000 to $4,000. It's a lot of money, and that's why people say, oh, we can't do this because, ministry costs a lot of money. This cost me $75. It was a sheet of lumber, framed it, and then got carpet samples, a mop head, PVC tubes that we wrapped around, drilled holes in so a ping pong ball can go through it. I got a water bottle, put little BBs in it, ball bearings that I glued shut that they could shake and feel, door stoppers, just some batting gloves that they can play with the Velcro. I've got individuals, this has been used now for 15 years. I've had individuals from 6 months old to 75 years old do it. The other thing you can't really tell in this picture, but if you notice, it's right on top of the floorboard. I want to have it low enough so my individuals with special needs and wheelchairs can roll right up and use it. So lower things. When my facilities team went to put it up, they wanted to put it higher. I'm like, nope, I need my individuals in wheelchairs to use it. So you have it lower. But then, here are some other examples you can do. The middle one is another board I made. This is a mobile board for if you are in a set up and tear down situation. It's a whiteboard that's magnetic. I get a two-sided one where one side I would leave blank that they could draw on. This side, I would get little magnetic hooks. and then had all kinds of little sensory things that they could touch and play with and meet their sensory needs. So that did a great job. Here's another example of another church that I worked with, did that. Our church as well, we also created a little bubble tube that they could sit there and work with as they go through it. But you can select a variety of sensory items to appeal those with sensory needs. It includes things like floor pillows, bean bags, weighted blankets, tactile toys, bubble tubes, music, and calming lights. But you want to also have a low sensory area in the room. Maybe a space where they can take a break from being too much stimulation. It could be just a comfy chair, a calming music, soft music, being able to turn down the lights or dim lights. You want to make sure, though, that the room is well organized, it's clutter-free, and able to help create an environment that's calming in there for those using the room. And lastly, make sure the room is well supervised at all times for the safety of everyone, because we always want to make sure you always have at least 2 people with an individual at all times. So to allow that, I actually got a volunteer that they were my sensory room volunteer, and that's where they worked all the time. They were my extra person, so when someone had to come in and use the sensory room, they didn't have to worry about getting another volunteer because I already had an extra volunteer in there. So those are things that we can think outside the box of. But what else goes into a sensory space, or what would go into a sensory box? First would be some cognitive toys, cause and effect toys, musical toys, maybe a computer, puzzles, things like that. Sensory toys are great. Massagers, koosh balls, light-up toys, fine motor toys as well, puzzles, blocks, Legos. They're all great. And then we can think about vestibular and proprioception input, like swings, trampolines. I like the trampolines with the little arm on it to help them balance. A rocking chair is also another good one. But then we need to think about other things too. We need to think about social interaction, so toys that will require more than 2 people to play with, maybe some games. But fidget toys, we've already talked about that some. McDonald's Happy Meal toys are the best ones out there for that. But we can get rain sticks or other things like that. Headphones, don't forget headphones. They are vital. They're very affordable. Noise-canceling headphones are about $7.50 each, but buy the right size. You want to make sure if you got some for your preschoolers, you buy the preschool size. You want to buy an elementary size, and then you want to buy an adult size. If most of the time we're just buying the adult size headphones, and they're too big and don't work for our little kids, and so they get sensory overload because it's not working. The other thing that we forget a lot of times is get some sunglasses. Go to the dollar store, go to resource fairs, and get the free sunglasses. Because you might have a kids' worship or might have a stage where you've got bright lights on you or that might go into the audience. Those lights can be bothering them. And even if you're in a room where you might have some fluorescent lights, that can bother them, not just the eyes, but that can also bother them hearing-wise. So by having the headphones, allowing them to wear the sunglasses, it allows them to remain in an environment that they wouldn't otherwise get to stay in because of the sensation. So that'll help them out. But we also want to think about having timers. You can get real timers, or you can get timers for your phone. For both your Android and your iPhones, the best app out there for a timer is called the Children's Countdown Timer. It's completely free, and I recommend you download it. You get the right one when you get the one with the yellow rubber ducky on the app emblem. But what's so great about that, you tell a child that you want to give them a timer, you start the timer, and as it starts ticking, and actually makes a tick noise, as it ticks down, a picture shows underneath the clock. And the child will sit there and watch. Sometimes these kids need a transition. They don't know how to just stop and go to something. So you can say, hey, in 2 minutes, we're going to go in and go back inside from playing. Okay, I'm going to start a timer to help them see that. And that's allowing them to think through, I need to change with that, so they can watch that and see how it goes. You can also go to sensoryneedstoys.com, and there's all kinds of things out there that you can see. All right? So let's take a minute now, and we're going to transition. And we're now going to go to volunteers. And volunteers are the lifeblood of our ministry. And this is one of my favorite quotes that is out there. It's from the late Martin Luther King Jr. And he says, everybody can be great because anybody can serve. You don't have to have a college degree to serve. You don't have to make your subject and your verb agree to serve. You don't have to know the second theory of thermodynamics in physics to serve. You only need a heart full of grace, a soul generated by love. I break this down to you only need to be a friend. That's what this sums up. In order to be a volunteer, it's just being a friend. You don't need to know anything else. So then I also go to the next great philosopher, the amazing philosopher Elf, who we all know and love. And he tells us, don't tell me what you can't do, tell me what you can do. And so everyone is concerned on how we recruit volunteers. And we all say, we don't have enough volunteers, and we don't know what to do. Well, here's the thing. Volunteer recruitment is not that hard. We can do it. The problem is, the majority of churches I know today have an 80-20 rule. And what that means is 80% of the work being done in your church is done by 20% of the people in the church. And the problem is, as ministry leaders, we keep going after that same 20% all the time. And that's why we always say we don't have enough volunteers. Well, when I hear that, what that means is that 80% of your people in your church, they're nothing more than glorified knickknacks. They're glorified knickknacks because they come into your church, they sit in the church chairs or pews, and they hear the message, and they collect dust like a glorified knickknack. And then they stand up after service, they wipe off the dust, go pick up their child, and they leave. My friends, that's the group that we have to go after. So how do we do it? It starts with sharing vision and stories of how the ministry is going to affect families and volunteers, and to get the volunteers and leaders to join you. We have to make it personal. We need to tap on shoulders. Bulletins do not work. Most announcements from the pulpit do not work. We need to make this personal. And we need to be excited when we do it. We need to be passionate. We need to cast vision as we do it. This is crucial. Our volunteers need to know that you need volunteers for your ministry. But we need to remove a couple words that we use frequently. Never use the word, I've got to fill holes. People don't want to fill holes. Our millennials today want to have a purpose. And so we got to share that to them. But we have to be able to cast vision to let people know what they're needing to do. What do I mean with that? Well, here's how you cast vision. This is what I would say for SOAR. SOAR exists to transform the lives of special families and empower them to soar in their local and faith communities. And by providing buddies for individuals with special needs, we can better help them to engage with the lessons and come to know Jesus. Guys, that's my elevator pitch. It just took me less than 30 seconds. I told them, this is why we need you to do it. Basically, it's being a friend, a guide on the side. You're going to transform their life. We're going to transform your life. And more importantly, we're sharing Jesus. And we share that. Now they can relate, okay, I see what I'm doing. But we have to be passionate when we're sharing volunteer opportunities. Too many times when I hear people asking someone to volunteer, would you volunteer in my ministry? We need a lot of help. It sounds like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh. Don't be an Eeyore. I need Tigger. I need, come serve in our ministry. It's going to be awesome. That's what we want. People are going to follow passion. But then we have to also empower people to volunteer. It's all about them imagining their ability to be able to do that. It's not filling a role, but getting them there. And we want story-based versus needs-based recruitment. Millennials want to be a part of things that create change, not to fill holes. So like I said, remove that. Keep that mindset away. But share stories of change and belonging when discussing your ministry to future volunteers. And then build a leadership team. I've already talked about that earlier, and that ministry team can help you as you go along with this. Next thing you do, pray, pray, pray. It really should be the very first thing you do. Bathe your ministry in prayer. What I recommend is that you pick a time every day, that you ask your team to take their phone, set the alarm, and pray. I picked 5:10 every day in the afternoon, not a.m. I'm not that mean. So 5:10 every afternoon, my alarm goes off. And all my leadership team, my staff, and all my volunteers, I say, please set the alarm and pray. Because when that phone goes off, I want you to pray. I want you to pray that God blesses us. God will provide the volunteers. God will provide the new families. And now as an independent nonprofit, that God will provide the funding, the money to allow us to serve the families we serve. And guys, we started that as a ministry in the church. And when I was doing that, we had growth like this at about a 25% rate. It was great. However, this is absolute music to God's ears when we can all be praying in unison. And we went from a 25% growth to about a 70, 80% growth. It's amazing how God will bless that. The other thing we need to do is recruit your youth ministry. The youth ministry are the secret sauce to it. And we're going to talk a little bit more here in a minute, but they can be the best and most faithful volunteers you have. Offer community service hours for them. Partner with your local universities, students looking to pursue degrees in special education, early childhood, family ministry. They're great things that they need community service hours and can do it. And then the next one, 4 most important letters in the alphabet. I-C-N-U. I-C-N-U. 4 most important letters when it comes to volunteer recruitment. And Sean, I'm going to ask you to come up here. I'm going to use you as an example. But for you as a ministry leader, and I don't care what area of ministry you're in, your job as a ministry leader is not making sure the ministry's happening, not making sure that the kids are in the right spot, that the volunteers are there, not making sure everything's going perfect. Your number one job is observing everyone that walks into your ministry. Because the people coming into your ministry area are the 80% that don't serve. And what I'm about to teach you is how I went from 20 volunteers to 2,500 volunteers. Here's how it is. I-C-N-U. First thing you do is you observe someone for characteristics that will work well in your ministry. And then you tell them that and do everything. So, Sean, I'll have you come over here. I'm the ministry leader, and I see Sean come into my ministry. This is literally how I'll do it. I'll come up to Sean on Sunday morning. Hey, Sean, how you doing today, brother? Good. So good to see you. You know what? You have just a minute? I've got to tell you, Sean, the last few weeks, I've been observing you as you're coming in, and I have to tell you, I see in you someone who's compassionate, who's got a heart for other people, and I see in you someone who cares for people. Sean, I've got a simple question for you. Can you be a friend?
Yes, I can.
I've never had anyone tell me no, they can't be a friend. Fantastic, Sean. That's all it takes. We have this new ministry working with individuals with special needs. All you need to do is be a friend. And we can teach you everything else. I've got a huge favor to ask of you, Sean. Would you take the next 2 weeks and pray and see if God would have you serve in this ministry? And then we can grab a cup of coffee in 2 weeks and talk about that.
Sounds good.
Guess what, guys? I've never had anyone tell me no, they won't pray. Especially when I'm asking them at church. And I'm doing it as a pastor. They're not about to tell you, no, they won't pray. All right, thank you, Sean. Give Sean a round of applause. Guess what happens? When I meet with them in 2 weeks, I have a 90% success rate at getting them to serve. 90%, 90. I said that right. Why? What did I do? I personally reached out. I literally tapped Sean on the shoulder. And then I said, hey, I see in you these characteristics that will work well here. And then I asked him to be a friend. And I said, that's the only requirement. I can teach you everything else. Now here's the trick. Did I ask Sean to volunteer? No, I did not ask him to volunteer. What did I ask Sean to do? Pray. I asked Sean to pray. That is where we fail. We frequently go right to ask someone to volunteer. My friends, our human nature will tell us to always say no when we're asked to volunteer, unless we've been worked on. And so we're always going to say no. But I don't ask that because I allow God to do my heavy work. And then I come in 2 weeks later after God did all my work, and it's easy. One of my favorite stories with this, I'm based in Kansas City, in Kansas, and we had a gentleman who moved up from Texas. I believe he's from Dallas. 67 years old, true Texan through and through. Wore his big 10-gallon cowboy hat every Sunday and had a huge handlebar mustache. I did the ICNU with him and told him that. Asked him if he could be a friend. He said yes. And then I'm talking and I said, would you please pray and do that? As I'm saying that, I see the N starting to form on his lips. And then he stopped, and this was what I got. Well, gosh darn, Doc. I can't tell a pastor at church I can't pray. I'll pray. And he prayed. 3 days later, he called me. He goes, Doc, I've got to be honest with you. I told you I'd pray because I can't tell a pastor at church I won't pray. That's not right. But I had no intention to pray. I thought you were going to ask me to serve, and I was going to tell you no. But I had no intention to pray, but God didn't let me quit thinking about it, so I went ahead and prayed a couple times. But for the last 3 nights, I've had the same dream all 3 nights. I go, hey, can you share with me what that dream is? He goes, yeah, I'm happy to. I'm working with a little boy. I think it might be in a children's ministry or something. I don't know. I've never seen it. But I'm working with this boy, and I'm having so much fun. I'm just filled with so much joy. I've never been so happy in all my life. And it's amazing. I go, hey, can you describe that boy for me? He goes, yeah, he's yay high. He maybe 3rd grade. He's completely bald. He can't talk, and he's got a funny looking face. I'm like, yeah, exactly. His name is Tommy, and he's the boy I've been praying that you volunteer with. And he broke down, and tears came to his eyes. And he goes, Doc, I'm in. God has broken my heart for him. And then he sat there and said, Doc, I've been in church my entire life, all 67 years. And I've worn it as a badge of courage that I have never volunteered in a church. And many times I've been asked to volunteer, and I always say no. But you did something no one has ever asked. You asked me to pray, and God broke my heart for Tommy, and I'm going to serve Tommy, and I'm going to serve God. That's how you get volunteers. Take it off of ourselves, put it on God, and a change will happen, and it works. The next thing we need to do is we need to make ministry visible. All right? This is Tyler, the first picture here, who I told you about serving in the church and being able to pass out bulletins. Everyone said, no, he can't do it, and then everyone wanted to go through his side. He had a huge smile on his face. Initially, I had to help him because that's what the ministry leader wanted, but then he was able to do it all on his own. And like I said, everyone went in on his side and then went to the regular seat. It allows him to serve. It's ministry by, and then it also increased the awareness of the disability ministry, allowed the church to know we're welcoming them and we're expecting them to serve, because we expect everybody who walks into our church to serve, because that's what Christ demands of us. You also want to partner with your local high schools and other organizations. I sat there and God laid on my heart that we were doing other events that were respite nights, giving families a break, and I had a lot of volunteers from outside the church that would come and serve. And then they're like, well, we want to help you out on Sunday morning. Well, we have a rule for our church, and I'm sure many of you too might, and our rule was you can't serve in a ministry unless you're a member of the church, you've been here at least 6 months, and you have a strong statement of faith. Well, then God said, this is a great opportunity to reach the lost. Think differently. They can be a volunteer and be a buddy, be that guide on the side where they just work with the individual special needs. They're not actually teaching about Jesus. They don't need that. They're a guide on the side, keeping them safe and watching them. And I went to our pastoral team. I said, I believe God's telling us this can be a new mission field. We can bring in individuals who will never go to church, but they love these individuals. They need community service hours. Let's bring them in and let's have them volunteer and serve, and we'll give them hours. Our pastoral team prayed about it, and we agreed to do that. And we started doing it. The first girl I had, at the time, we had 5 services every weekend, 2 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday. She served all 5 services every weekend for 1 month. After the 5th service on the 4th Sunday, she came up to me and said, Doc, what is this Jesus stuff all about? I got to take the next 30 minutes, I led her to Christ. That was my very first one. 2 months later, her mom and dad and 18-year-old brother walk into the church sanctuary, the foyer. Dad yells out, where's Doc Hunsley? I need to talk to him about what he did to my daughter. I'm like, whoop, time out. I don't know what you're talking about. And then he told me who his daughter was. And he said, my daughter used to be hateful. She was evil. She was bitter, mean. But then you did something to her, and she's now the most happy, pleasant person I've ever met in my life. She's a joy to be around, and she's completely different from the inside out. My whole family wants what she has. What did you do? And I got to share Jesus with them. I led all 3 of them to Christ. My friends, it's a way to be out of the box that we started bringing people into the church. High school students, National Honor Society, college students, early childhood students, elementary special ed students, occupational therapy students, physical therapy students. I lost count at 150 volunteers I led to Christ. And I know it was many more. That's another way we can get volunteers. And then encourage your volunteers to recruit their friends. But we always need to remember we still need to have background checks to be safe as we go through things. But just start, we can also then go and talk to our church. And this is something I actually did a couple weeks ago. I was at a church and went to them. And we got to be positive when we're talking to the church and do that. So exactly what I do, I went in and I'd say, hey, good morning, Grace Church. So glad you're here. I'm Doc Hunsley. Now, before we start this morning, I'd like you to raise your hand if you can be a friend. I had 100% of the church raise their hand. I'm like, congratulations. Each and every one of you can now be a volunteer in our new special needs ministry. That's the only requirement we have to serve in our special needs ministry. You're now qualified. Do you know that 26% of the U.S. population has a diagnosis of special needs or disability, making the largest minority group in the U.S.? And with that, currently 89% of churches are turning families away with disability, and only 11% welcome them. Well, today, Our church is going to be one of the 11% who's welcoming individuals with disabilities. But we need your help to do it. And it starts with being a friend. That's where it starts. At the same time, 90% of families with disabilities aren't attending church. It's the largest unmet people group in the United States. And so we want to share the gospel to the lost in our community. 26% of the homes around this church have someone with special needs. 90% are not going to a church. And we need you to stand in the gap and transform the lives of these individuals and of yourself. Would you please just take a minute and come talk to me after the service and see if God would have you serve? I did that at my church. I got 150 people the first Sunday. My pastor said there's no way I get more than 20. The church I just did this last weekend, they had about 850 people in the congregation. The senior pastor there said, well, how many do you think you'll get? I said, I bet we'll get 75 to 100. He goes, there's not a chance. There's never been that kind of response. Folks, I had 127 who stood up and said, I'm on board. When we share vision, when we share the reason, and we're passionate about it, people will get behind that story and then do it. You can also share a video then of a family in your church with special needs and why it's so important that they're attending. And then after that video, say, hey, come talk to me in the foyer, and we'll get you plugged in. That's how we do it. People want to serve if they see a true reason and a good story, and that's what you want. You want to have both. So how do you recruit leaders? We need to scout volunteers for passion and commitment to your vision and engagement in their walk with God. It's way easier to grow someone's skill level than it is their commitment level. So skill improvement is equipping them with knowledge and experience. Those are all external factors, but commitment is grown internally. And it takes a whole lot more work to grow that. So find someone who already shows the commitment, and you can work on everything else. But look for volunteers who have been bought in over time, at least a few months. You don't want new volunteers because you want someone who understands, who's learned the DNA of your ministry and is able to share that vision. And then you want to recruit leaders based on their gifts and their passions, not because of the ministry needs. I ended up recruiting a volunteer. I did the whole ICNU. And I was doing it with this young female leader. And as I'm doing it with her, I really need an adult female to work with one of my young adult women. And I needed a female volunteer with her. And the very first question I always have after someone tells me they're going to serve, my next question is, what are you passionate about? I never ask where they want to serve or what they want to do, because I try to match passion with ministry, and when you get the two together, you lock in. Well, she sat there and said, you know what? I'm passionate about helping encourage people. I just love doing that. And I'm like, yeah, that's being a buddy, but that's not the best use of it. And then God flicked me on the head and said, okay, ding dong, that's not the best use of her. You do a horrible job of encouraging your volunteers. You've got a lot of volunteers, but you don't thank them enough. Have her do that. So I asked her to become my volunteer encouragement officer. And so for once a month, she would sit there and put together a little something. I'll show pictures here in a little bit, where she'd encourage my volunteers and make like a little baggie that she would put in a small Hershey bar, a marshmallow, and a graham cracker. And then put a note on it that said, we need some more volunteers like you. It cost me 6 cents to make that bag per volunteer. And my volunteers loved it. They felt appreciated. They were no longer a number. 3 months later, she came back to me and said, Doc, I love doing this, but God's calling me to do more. And I still got my adult volunteer that I needed. So the other thing we need to do with leaders is you need to recruit your replacement. Yes, I said that. Recruit your replacement. It's absolutely fine to do it. Doesn't mean you're not going to be doing your job anymore, but it allows you to do the things that only you can do. And that should be our weekly goal, that we have volunteers doing most of our work so we can truly focus on what only we can do. Plus, if you're at a church that's really growing, like I shared with my church grew. We went from 1 campus to 3 campuses over a couple of years. We were the first ministry that had ministry leaders for those other churches. Why? Because I was already training up people to be my replacement. And they offered to go to those other campuses and lead those ministries. That's how we do it, so when your church grows. But now let's talk, I've already mentioned some with the students. Students truly are the secret to your success. So what can we do? Students want to make a difference, and many grew up in inclusive environments, so working with individuals with special needs comes naturally to them. So we want to challenge them to step up, and typically they'll do so and just blow your expectation away. Treat them like an adult as you go through all this. In fact, for my teams, the overwhelming majority of my volunteers are students. You don't need to have a minimum age. I just prefer if they're younger, they always have a volunteer that's younger than them working with them. But what's the benefit of having a student? They recruit their peers very, very well. They recruit their friends better than I do. And once you get into one friend group, you get all those friends. And they're a community-focused generation, and they love serving together. So that's a win-win. But also give students leadership opportunities. Build opportunities for students to become leaders in your ministry. I created an apprentice program for my junior high and high schoolers. I picked one student from 6th grade to 12th grade that I would pour into. And we would meet once a month where I just poured in leadership into them. But then every weekend, one of the hours, I would have them actually serving in our ministry, doing something. And over time, it just grew. And by the time they were seniors in high school, they could completely run my entire ministry. But by doing this, we're empowering future ministry. This is the age where many students will recognize that they want to spend their lives doing this, or what they want to do, and help them envision special needs or disability ministry. And you can help build up ministry that will do special needs and disability ministry in the next 5 or 10 years. It's the greatest opportunity for special needs ministry in the U.S. and the world. So how do we retain volunteers? I already told you the story of my appreciation coordinator. These are some of the things she made. We need more volunteers like you. A little baggie with some starbursts in it. Bursting with appreciation for your star-studded effort. This took nothing to do. And she created these, and honestly, most of the things she created are all on Pinterest now. She was kind of the creator of this many, many years ago. And our volunteers loved it. Guess what started happening? We started getting volunteers from other ministries who felt like they were being used and not appreciated, and they came to serve in our ministry because they wanted to be appreciated. Until our church made it a requirement that every ministry do this because they saw the impact it was having. So people want to be appreciated, and so we have to cast our vision well. Along with that, I would meet with our team before we served every Sunday morning, and we prayed together. I'd ask them what their prayer requests are, and then we would pray. And especially since I had so many youth, if someone had a test that week, I would text them the morning of the test, praying for you. Go knock out the test. You're going to do awesome. That makes a huge impact. But we need to appreciate them. Find something. Candy and little puns are great. They're cheap. But we want to make it personable. Do it church-wide. If you can, incorporate the volunteers' love language into it. Remember, only one of them actually costs money. So words of affirmation, thank you notes, affirming them when you give them assignments, quality time. Take them out to coffee or lunch or small group or just spending time with them. Gifts, coffee, candy, gift cards or things. Acts of service. Offer to help them with things or that they have coming up or serve alongside with them in things. Touch, that can be a tricky one. But, especially at church, but we can do side hugs. We can do shoulder pats, high fives, handshakes. They're all acceptable and can do it. But here's a big one that we never do. Thank a volunteer when they cancel, especially if they cancel on time. Thank them and don't argue with them that they still have to serve or talk them into it. Thank them. Oh, okay, thank you. We so appreciate you serving with us. And then the other one, spiritual encouragement. As a ministry director, it's our job to also spiritually encourage them. So we have to shepherd our volunteers, and that doesn't happen unless we're doing spiritual encouragement. So pray regularly for them and with your volunteers. Again, the 510 prayer alarm I think that's important for them. Pray with them, ask their prayer requests, and then actually let them know that you're praying with them. And encourage them to attend a service, especially if you have multiple services. Don't have them just come and serve and then go home. Encourage them to attend service. And that includes you. You need to attend service so you can get your spiritual tank filled as well. And then we want to make sure that we're doing training as well that's ongoing. And even in our training, have devotional time with that as we do it. But we want to become a family and not become a number. This gal on here, that was one of my apprentices. She started as in 6th grade, and by the time she was a senior in high school, she was completely running my ministry of 800 individuals. She completely oversaw my summer camp with 150 individuals, special needs, and 500 volunteers. She went on a missions trip to Brazil to an organization we're working with that's serving with individuals with special needs. And so she sent me this picture. I immediately text her back and say, hey, I'm praying for you. I'm so proud of you and how you're allowing God to use you. She considers me a second father for her. Why? Because we become a family. Treat your volunteers like a family. And then we want, like I mentioned earlier, we want to match passions and skills, not just putting them in areas. So never fill a hole, do that. But treat and value volunteers like people, not like a number. It's going to make a huge difference. We need to let them use their head and their heart, and you handle the rest of the hard stuff. So there can be a toxic environment with volunteers. How do we handle that? Well, first, some possible causes, it could be a culture of obligation, making volunteers feel like they're obligated to serve. How do you resolve that? Apologize. Tell them you're in the wrong and you're going to not shift blame to others. You own it and you're going to do better, and just seek their forgiveness. I had to do that in my ministry. I had a ministry leader that was forcing people to do things and obligating them, and it became toxic. As soon as I found out, I took ownership of it. I never did it, but it happened in my ministry. And I apologized. I removed that leader, said she can't do that anymore, put her in a different area, and then we started making changes, and it became positive. But we need to understand the volunteers, regardless or not if they've been wrong, try to figure out what's happening, work through it, talk through things, and create change quickly when we see something going on. But we need to talk through things and have opportunity for feedback, give clarifying messages, allow them a chance to talk to you as well. Next important thing is training. You have to have training. This is one of the biggest misses in a ministry. Once you recruit a volunteer, if we don't train them how to work with an individual with special needs, they're not going to be the best that they can be, because we've got to help them. So it's not enough to help a volunteer see that they're capable of being part of your ministry, but you need to give them the tools to succeed and giving them techniques to be successful and not to be fearful. People need to recognize that they don't need to have experience again with special needs. They just need to be willing to be a friend. And so anybody can do it. Again, no experience required. And I've created a training program that I go and do at churches. I've got hundreds of churches throughout the world using it. And this is an example of one of the case scenarios that I've created. And it's a 2-hour training. The first hour, I teach you about behavior, how to identify it, how to prevent it, and work through it. And then we work through 10 case-based scenarios. And this is an example. The group is having worship. The child you are working with is rocking, covering their ears, and seems to be getting upset. What should you do now, and what do you change for next week? And then I have my volunteers talk about it, because I've already told them all the answers the first hour, and then we work through it. Guess what? In medicine, I've got a rule: see one, do one, teach one. That's how we learn something. Well, they saw it by me teaching them. They did it with this, so that now when they're actually in the classroom and see something, they can actually perform it. So this is actually a great scenario that they can use to work through it. We've got 10 scenarios that they can work through. You can check out our YouTube channel. I've got an old video of this, or you can contact me about seeing how SOAR can come alongside you and help you with it. But who needs training? Everybody. Security team, church greeters, information desk, children's ministry volunteers, student ministry volunteers, and then special needs volunteers. I already shared the story about our parking lot attendant, but that's the reason for it. What needs to be in the training? Your ministry vision, your goals, the role of the buddy, how to handle behaviors, crisis prevention techniques. It's got to be comprehensive. It has to be ongoing. It has to be after the initial training. You need to at least have biannual training. But here's the trick. You never call training after the initial one training, or volunteers won't show up. They think they've already been trained. And so I want to create a family environment. So for all my follow-up ones, I don't call it training, I call it buddy gatherings. My volunteers, I call them buddies, and we call it buddy gatherings. And they don't even realize most of the time that they're being trained. So let me give you an example. We're going to have a buddy gathering where I'm going to train on how to work with an individual who's nonverbal. They don't speak. It's an important training. So we start the night off. We'll pick a night. We have everyone come in for the buddy gathering. Maybe we all bring in desserts. We have time of fellowship and talk. And then we do an icebreaker game to start the evening. My icebreaker is charades. Communicating without talk. We're going with it. Then I give a devotional, a 5 to 10 minute devotional. That devotional I'm going to use is how God used somebody in the Bible who wasn't able to speak. We can communicate without our voice. And then I'll spend the next 10 to 15 minutes actually training on the topic with nonverbal communication and how we can work with the individual and do things. And then we leave. We did it all in an hour. And the volunteers come out of that making connections with other volunteers, feeling blessed, and not really even realizing they just had an entire evening where they were trained. And so that's how we can make it all a huge win. So, but let's talk about what is a buddy. What is a volunteer? It's actually a special needs or disability ministry buddy at church is a trained volunteer who provides support and assistance to individuals with special needs during the church service and activities. This buddy is typically assigned to a specific individual and helps them participate in church activities, helps navigate the physical environment, and helps them engage with peers and other members of the congregation. They can assist with personal needs such as toiletry, feeding, and any other needs they have. But we want them to feel included, supported, and valued members of the classroom. And so what are the roles of the buddy? I've got 10 roles. Basically, the buddy needs to be an individual who will ensure that they're being safe. It's a guide on the side who is going to be sharing the love of Jesus with the individual by helping them stay focused. They're not actually doing the teaching themselves, but they allow independence when available by allowing the teacher and the individual get the most out of the teacher-generated curriculum. We want them to be able to interact with their peers and have that. We want to focus on their abilities, not their disabilities. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, let's say you're in a children's classroom and you're going to do craft time and you're using scissors. Well, the individual you're working with might have a difficulty using fine motor techniques, and they're not able to use scissors. And they might be struggling to cut out the craft. That's where you want to focus on their ability. You take the scissors, you simply cut out the craft, give the craft back to them, and allow them to color it and fill it in, paint, color, whatever they need to do. That is now their craft. They did it, but you focused on their ability, them being able to color and do everything else, and not their disability, not being able to cut it out. Otherwise, they could have struggled, done that. Other kids could have started making fun of them. Other volunteers stare. We completely remove that. So that's what this is about. We also want to make sure they're never left one-on-one. We want to be positive, always sharing something positive with them, especially with the parents. Every time parents come pick up, we always give something positive. And then we want to know techniques on how to be successful. How do we handle affection? Our individuals love to show affection. So what do we do to show that? Well, they love to give hugs and kisses and sit on our laps. We can't do that. We can do side hugs, high fives, fist bumps, and no sitting on the lap. We just have to be above reproach. But let's talk about how we can be successful here with that. So to be successful as a buddy, I've got a pyramid system that we work on from the top down. And so it's systematic. First, we tell them what we want them to do. Next, we show them, if that doesn't work, we show them what we want them to do. And finally, if none of that works, then we actually do it with them, actually do what we want them to do. So let's break each one of these down and talk through that. So first, we actually repeat the instruction. Repeat what the teacher said to do. We actually repeat the action words. And what does that mean? Oh, that means that you as a volunteer, you're actually listening. We're off our phone. We're actually being there as a friend working with them. And so we have to be aware of what's being said. Sometimes they're giving multiple steps. Our friends can only follow 1 or 2 steps at a time, so maybe we're just having to say the first piece of that instruction. So we tell them that first step. How do you know what to repeat? Again, we have to be listening. How do you know if they've heard what the teacher said? Well, you watch them watching the teacher, and you know what their listening looks like. Or you look for them to take action. If they don't take action, but they're looking at their peers and imitating what they're doing, that's still a win. That's still more independent than actually repeating and doing anything for them. But if they're not doing any of that, then we move to the next step where we show them. We actually model the instruction. When should you model the teacher's instruction? Well, when they don't follow instructions after you say how to do it. Or when they're not paying attention or understand what the teacher is saying. Or when the instruction involves, again, multiple steps and you need to break it down to steps at a time. So if none of that is working, then we have to move to the final one and do the instruction. Actually do the task with the individual. When should we do the teacher's instruction? Well, first, when they refuse after you've modeled it for them. Second, when they're too distracted to be able to do it on their own. And third, when they need to see it again after a failed attempt. When do you stop? Well, you stop when you feel physical resistance. Or if you see signs that they don't like to be touched. They cringe, they move away, they slap at your hand. Or you stop when they actually start doing it. And here's the big one we always forget about. You stop when the behavior worsens. Stop when the behavior worsens. Many times we think we have to keep pushing through it. We're making the behavior worse. Thing I want you to remember, all behavior is a form of communication. Let me say that again. All behavior is a form of communication. It is our job to try to figure out what they are trying to tell us. So if we're trying to continue to push that lesson, showing them what to do, and the behavior's worsening, they're telling us, I don't want to do this, stop. And we just need to stop and we'll see that behavior disappear. So speaking of behavior, let's talk about problem behavior. It's totally easy to pretend that problem behavior won't happen, and when it does happen, you may be like this ostrich and stick your head in the sand thinking it's not going to happen again. But we have to remember you're never alone. Ask for help, because all behavior is a form of communication. We need to try some of the techniques we're talking about today, ask others for help, see what's going on, but remember, all behavior is a form of communication. What are they trying to tell us? So, problematic behavior, how is it defined? It's actually defined by each environment and the toleration level. So it's dependent on people, on the space, on the activities, and the expectations. So what you view as problematic behavior might be different than what I view as problematic behavior. And that is okay. It's different for everybody. But problematic behavior refers to behaviors that interfere with the individual's ability to function effectively in their environment and interact appropriately with others. It can be a wide variety of things. It might include physical aggression, self-injury, property destruction, non-compliance, social withdrawal, among other things. And these behaviors can be caused by a variety of factors, including communication difficulties, sensory processing issues, anxiety, and just simple frustration. So another job of the buddy is to have clear guidelines to know what they should handle on their own and when they should seek help and ask for help with something. One of my rules is if you see a new problematic behavior more than 2 times, you need to stop and figure out what that is, because they're trying to tell you something. One of my stories with that, we had an adult class with special needs that we have an adult Sunday school class with. And they would go to the adult worship service for worship. After that, they'd come downstairs to the basement for our adult Sunday school class. One of our guys, he's 61 years old. He's awesome. We'll call him Tommy. And Tommy has autism, he's nonverbal, and he's always happy, always smiling and giggling, and he always carries a little ball that he plays with. And this day, though, Tommy walked into the room, the ball fell to the ground, he falls to the ground, covering his ears, and starts screaming a high-pitched, blood-curdling scream. Things were not right. And so we ended up interacting, trying to help him, and couldn't get him to calm down until we took him out of the room. He's having problem behavior and trying to tell us something. I didn't know what it was. Never has that kind of behavior. So one thing that can happen, especially for someone who's nonverbal, he could start getting sick. And so I told his caregivers about that. They went and got him checked. Everything was fine. He was great the rest of the week. They told us, I'm like, okay, maybe it was just a one-time thing. That next Sunday he comes back, the exact same thing happened again. 2 times, same exact thing happened. I've got to figure out why. Because it's not his problem, it's mine. He's trying to tell me something. All behavior is a form of communication. So I told my team, hey, after church, I'm buying lunch for everybody. We're not leaving until we figure out what's causing his problem. And so we stayed. An hour and a half after going through everything in the room, we couldn't find a single thing that was different. And then I looked over, and I saw a floor fan that was on top of a metal filing cabinet. I said, hey guys, how long has that fan been on my metal filing cabinet? I'm like, I don't know. I couldn't hear any vibration noise with it. I didn't know. I said, doesn't it normally sit on the wood desk right next to it? They're like, yeah, it does. I said, let's move it back. The following week, and we couldn't find anything else, we just went ahead and said, okay, let's try that. Following week, he walked in, not a single problem. The problem was that fan was causing a high-pitched frequency that was hurting his ears. If we ignored it and said it was his problem, we would have lost that family. They would have never come back to the church. But the problem was our cause. We caused that behavior. So figure out what's causing the behavior and work through that and see what's going on. But when you do have problem behavior, you first must remain calm. And then you've got to ask yourself 3 questions. Am I safe? Is my individual safe? And can we keep on task? If the answer is yes to all of those, you can continue. But the answer is no, you have to take action. And the bottom line is you can think anything you want to, but you have to show a complete poker face and not let anyone know that you are scared or don't know what to do. You have to remain calm voice. You walk into the room, you don't run into the room and deal with the behavior that's happening. And you don't need to know what's going on, you just need to do your best at trying to get them back on task. If it's a big enough behavior, you call for help and someone else will come in and help you. First, you want to make sure everyone else is safe. So sometimes it is easier to remove the rest of the individuals in the classroom than it is the individual with special needs having the fight or the behavior. And so you can simply tell a teacher, hey, now's a good time to take everyone out to the bathroom or go get water break and have them go. Call for help, have someone with you with that. Or you can ensure, and then make sure, we're keeping the individual safe. By having them removed, we can shut off the lights, decrease the sound. A lot of times that will bring down the things. But as we go through this, we have to become a detective and figure out what is causing the behavior. Are they doing it for attention? Are they doing it to get out of work or task or because it feels good or bad to them? So let's talk about each one of these. Is it attention seeking? What type of attention are they seeking? Are they seeking it from you or the teacher or someone else? Do they need motivation? Can we teach them to ask for help with that? What are they trying to do with the attention? I'm sorry. Can I withhold? We can ask the question, can I withhold the attention during the behavior? Or can I provide that attention in a different way for a desired behavior? So I'll only give them attention for them doing what I want them to do. See what's going on with that. Or is it to escape work? Are they trying to get out of something because they don't like it? Or are they just, saying, hey, I'm going to be the snail, peace out, I'm out of here? Do they need motivation? Teach them to ask for help. We can provide breaks. We can provide rewards for portions of the work and work towards that as we go through it. And then finally, because of the way it feels, it feels really good. So it can be sensory overload, too much, or it can be sensory seeking, not enough, where they need more. Well, then we have two options. We can do free access, where we just give them the object that they're trying to get and just let them play with it. A lot of times that'll remove the behavior. They might want a fidget toy. Just let them have the fidget toy and it disappears. Or we can do an earned access, where we have a reward board and they actually work towards that. And as they work and do things, they get stars. You never remove a star, and they get closer and closer to the goal. They get what you work for, and that works well. But we have to be alert and react in the best way possible. Realize you are never alone as you're going through it. Just ask for help. But you need to be comfortable. You need to be confident as you go through it. Now, just because there's behavior doesn't mean that anyone did anything wrong. And it doesn't mean that the person showing you the behaviors doesn't like you or is even mad. It can be difficult to pay attention the whole time and constantly being around a lot of other people. And even for us, it can be frustrating. The difference is that most of us know the appropriate way to show frustration. The individual with special needs, they may have more difficulty, and that is okay. We have to realize that. And one of the things that we have to do then is redirection. We have to redirect our behavior. And when it comes to behavior, if you don't remember anything else today, I hope you remember this slide. And I'd encourage you all to take a picture of this slide to remind you with that. We always want to redirect behavior. Now, what we normally do when someone has bad behavior, whether it's a child in our ministry or our own kids, what do we say? And well, let's just say they're hitting. Don't hit. Quit hitting. Stop hitting. Does it ever work? No, they don't. And we say, I wish they would listen to me. Well, guys, it took me a while, and finally, my medical school kicked in. And I'm like, oh my gosh, why did I not think of this when my kids were young? The human brain is wired to hear the last word you say. So all they're hearing is hit, hit, hit when you're telling them to stop. And they actually are doing what you're telling them to, because all they hear is hitting. Instead, we need to tell them something different, something positive we want them to do, redirect that. So instead of sitting there saying, hey, stop touching Susie, we can say, hey, why don't you touch your hands together? Or let's come color something. 80% of the time, they're going to stop doing what they're doing and change and follow that behavior. You might be sitting here going, no, Doc, this is crazy. Okay, let's test this out. Don't think of an elephant. Do not think of an elephant. Quit thinking of an elephant. Now, raise your hand if you're thinking of a squirrel. No one is thinking of a squirrel. I promise all of you are thinking of an elephant. But I told you not to think of an elephant. You didn't listen to me. You did listen to me. The brain heard elephant and immediately gave you that picture of an elephant. Having an elephant on the screen also helps, but that's how the brain works. It eliminated don't and went to that. That's what our kids are doing. So we need to be smart when we're telling them something. We tell them something positive to do, and when they do it, we give them praise for actually doing it. Because the bottom line is we have to remember success is different for everyone. We've got to build from the bottom up, and the closer and closer we get to the goal, the better it is. We have to be a builder of tasks and closer to it, because everyone's different, and that's all right. Now I want to take a couple minutes and just talk about special considerations for individuals with special needs. First, when the parent comes to drop them off, listen to what the parent has to say. If she says, mom says, Susie, she had a hard night last night. She didn't really sleep well. Well, when Susie starts falling asleep in your Sunday school class, it might be okay to let her sleep. Because if we try to keep her awake, she's going to have behaviors because she's so tired. But if mom sits there and says, oh, Susie had a really good night last night. She's having a great morning. And then Susie starts trying to fall asleep. it's okay to try to keep her up because we know she's doing well. But when we give instructions, we want them clear, we want them short. We want to identify abilities and strengths and find things they can be successful in. We want to use patience. We want to encourage and be successful with that. We need to give firm limits and set them. It's absolutely okay to tell someone no, they can't do something. But we can do limit setting, like, hey, Johnny, first we're going to sit at the table, then we get to go play. They need to know this in their head. Okay, first we have to do this, then you get to do that. Or if you do this, then this happens. Or when we sit here, then we can go do this. That all helps them to know things. But we need to limit our choices to 1 to 2 things. Help them when you see them starting to get frustrated. Engage in activities with them and have fun, enjoy yourself. Here's one of my biggies, though. Don't ever talk about an individual in front of them as if they're not there, especially if they're nonverbal. Just because they're nonverbal does not mean they don't understand. So give them the respect that they're due. And then teach other kids and students to accept them and be a good example, accepting them as an individual of God who's uniquely and wonderfully made. So let's talk about how we can prevent some crises. We have to be empathetic. When they start getting agitated, let's get down on their level, pay attention. I like to put my hand on their shoulder and just start massaging. Sometimes you see that stress decrease out of them. If they don't like to be touched, they'll show you that, and then you just let go. But give clarifying messages. Repeat what they're trying to say to you. You can use, again, that deep pressure. Maybe they need to take a walk or go to the quiet room or spin. Set reinforceable limits, the if-then statements, first-then statements. Ignore challenging statements and challenging questions. It's absolutely fine to redirect them or answer the question once, but don't overreact. That's one of the biggest things we do. We have to avoid overreacting. Remain calm. Walk when we get to the individual's room. And then I always say, before I get into the room for a behavior, I stop, take a big breath, I do a text message prayer. God help. And then I walk in, calm, and that helps. And then physical restraints are always a last resort and always call for help to help you as you're going through things. So let's talk about our toolbox, things that we can use. Starboards down there in the corner. There's many varieties of these, but you use this to work towards a reward that you decide on ahead of time. You agree on the reward. They get stars for making good choices, for doing things you want them to do. They never lose a star. They only get them for doing the positive things. And once they get all 5 stars, then they get to do whatever the activity is. However, they never get out of the story time or the worship. Those are the areas we want them in. But they can definitely get out of snack time or play time. Those are times that we can definitely go and do other things. And so you can have physical boards, make your own. There's also some on phones, too, that you can get. Went the wrong way. And then we can also do fidget toys. We see on there, we've already talked about McDonald's Happy Meals, timers we've talked about, wiggle seats there at the bottom. These are great. Many of our friends just need to get some wiggles out of them. One side of this is rigid, the other side is smooth. They just help them sit and move around. Sometimes if you got someone who doesn't want to sit, I can throw 2 different ones on the floor and say, pick a color, and they'll pick a color to sit on. So great things you can do. Headphones, sunglasses we've talked about, if-then statements. But then in the middle are visual schedules. And this is a great thing that really helps our individuals know what's going to happen by having a visual schedule of what's going to happen during that hour. And I like having actual pictures of where they're going to be. Maybe they're doing prayer time or they're doing worship or whatever. You have pictures of the areas. And I do Velcro with it. And when they're done, I just take it off so they know what's happening. And you'll be amazed how that actually helps everybody that you're working with. All right, going to jump ahead. We've already talked through... I shared this scenario earlier, but I just want to talk about it a little bit, about the individual who's rocking, covering their ears. This is due to sensory overload, and this is part of the training that I do. And I've got an individual who was in our ministry. Her name's Katlana Vrana, and she drew this for me. I went to her. She's nonverbal, but I talked to her, and I said, I need to know why you do all that when you're getting overloaded. and she was selective mutism. So she would pick when she would talk. And she just wrote out and she said, next week I'll bring it to you. Instead, next week, she brought me an illustrated book that she ended up publishing called Eliada, a book about autism by an autistic person. It's gone through 3 printings. It's now out of date, unfortunately, but at the age of 18, she did this. And she said this was her brain. That's her in the middle, and that's her brain, and her brain's on fire. And when she's sensory overload, there's so much going on. She covers her ears to block out the noise. She shuts her eyes real tight to block out the light. She closes her mouth and really tight because she can hear through her mouth and everything, and she tries to block out all the input. I'm like, okay, that all makes sense to me. And then I go, why do you rock? And then she laughed and she wrote on a paper, come on, doc, you're a doc, you should know this. I'm like, what? She goes, it's painful. I'm like, oh my gosh, okay. Guys, I've had the joy of passing over 100 kidney stones. And every kidney stone I've ever passed, I am rocking in agony because it is so painful. I can't help but rock. That's why they're doing this. And so we need to figure out what's causing all this. Yeah, shut off the lights, give them headphones, do everything else. But just because they're covering their ears doesn't mean it's too loud. They're blocking every type of input because it's so painful. So we got to figure out what all this is going on and work through them with that. All right. Other things we can do is figure out how we can engage the church. Maybe have a special needs Sunday where you actually have our individuals be a part of the church, do a play, have them do the message, have them sing, do all kinds of things. Help promote your ministry to the entire church. That's a wonderful thing to do. You can also engage and partner with other organizations. We have the SOAR Special Needs, SOAR Disability Ministry Network. We used to meet in person, but now we've grown. We're now online the 4th Thursday of every month. It's free. It's virtual. The 4th Thursday of every month, I invite you to be a part of that. You can get with other organizations as well. But the important thing is to know to partner with your families. Make them be a part of your vision. Meet them where you're at, create programs to help meet their needs, not your dreams. Do what you want if you were the parent as you think through things with that. And so, with it, I want you to realize that it's vital to be able to welcome families with disabilities. And it's a biblical mandate. We don't have a choice if we do this or not. We are called to do this. And every single church needs to be able to do this. You start with where you're at. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to do it. It just starts with being a friend and going with that. I'm going to actually skip ahead a little bit. This is on respite. I'm happy to talk to you later on respite, but just for sake of time, we're going to jump ahead here. Some resources I want you to be aware of, especially for respite. I can help you with that. Nathaniel's Buddy Break, Johnny and Friends, 99 Balloons, and Key Ministries are great organizations that can help you with things. Other thing here that I'll be closing with is every ministry is different. We don't have to go out and think we have to do exactly what someone is doing. I do not want you to sit here and be scared when you hear, oh my gosh, Doc had 800 individuals with disabilities and 2,500 volunteers. There's no way we can do that. You don't have to be SOAR. You have to be your church. And whatever that is fine. But you have to do something. You have to start with who you have and build that up. I'm very unique when it comes to those who train churches and train them up. I don't come in with a cookie cutter. I come in and I help each church find what's unique for them. But you've got to do what's right for your church. You don't have to do everything, but do things that are sustainable for your church, of your size and your resources. I've helped churches as small as 6 people to churches larger than 30,000. It doesn't matter the size of your church. We are all called to welcome individuals and families with disabilities. So find what works for your church and do it to the absolute best of your ability. Like I said, I would love to have you be a part of our SOAR Disability Ministry Network. It's the 4th Thursday of every month. But the other thing I'd be honored to do is offer everybody here and anybody who would watch this a free 1-hour consultation online where I will meet with you, talk through ministry, and see how I can help you get started and how SOAR can help you with things. But the bottom line is there are 7 days in a week, and someday is not one of them. So today is the day to start welcoming families with disabilities into your church. And it just starts with who you have. We don't need to be fearful. It doesn't take a lot with that, but it does start. And here's my other challenge to you. If you're not willing to start that today, here's what I ask you to do. If you're not willing at your church or your senior leadership's not willing to do this, the next thing I want you to start doing, I am asking you to pray. To start working on your answer for Judgment Day. For when you stand before God and He asks you, why did you not welcome the least of these like I commanded you? That's a very real question that's going to come. And we're going to have to answer if we don't welcome them. Because this is a biblical mandate in Luke 14, not once but twice. And we are called to do it. So just last couple things, couple resources want you to make sure you're aware of. These are some books that are out there. Unfortunately, most of them are getting pretty old. Everyone is screaming at me to write a book. It's on my list, but haven't gotten there yet. And here's some websites. You've got us with SOAR Special Needs. Johnny and Friends with irresistiblechurch.org has some amazing downloadable books you can get. They're completely free. You need to check that out. Key Ministry, Johnny and Friends, Pure Ministries, AbilityMinistry.com are all great resources. But again, here's my contact information. If you got any questions, that's the QR code. You can email me as well and ask for a more extensive handout or my plan of care. I'm happy to share that with you. But it's an honor to be here with you today. Just start and become a church of belonging where you do ministry with and by. Thank you so much. God bless.